I could still feel the warmth of his hand on my stomach, a gentle, loving pressure as we sat together in the kitchen, mugs of tea forgotten on the table. The glow from the under-cabinet lights cast soft shadows around the room, and outside, the night was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old Victorian house settling into the evening. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, me and Edward, awaiting the arrival of our little one. I looked up at him, the love in his eyes so undeniable, so deep, that I could almost taste it. He was leaning forward, his forehead almost touching my own, whispering softly to the bump that was still barely noticeable beneath my oversized jumper. His voice, full of tenderness and anticipation, made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. "You're going to be perfect, my little one," he said, his lips curling into a smile that was both dreamy and playful. "Just like your mum." I felt my heart skip a beat at the words, at the adoration in his voice. It was such a simple thing, that smile, but it sent a ripple of warmth through my chest, like a fire rekindled. Edward's blue eyes sparkled in the dim light, and for a moment I was lost in the way he looked at me, the way he already saw the future, all smiles, laughter, and soft moments. We were still early in the pregnancy, barely past the 12-week mark, but Edward had already mapped out a perfect future for us in his head. I could see it when he spoke, the way he'd talk about nursery themes, baby names, and the life we were about to build. He'd always been the dreamer between us, the one who looked to the stars and imagined them within reach. I'd often catch him gazing at me with that look, like I was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, as though the moment we found out I was pregnant had changed everything for him. Pregnancy was hard, as it is for every woman. I had nausea that clung to me like a shadow, sleepless nights that seemed to stretch into endless mornings, swollen ankles that felt as though they belonged to someone else entirely, and the general exhaustion that came with carrying life inside me. But with Edward beside me, it felt manageable. More than manageable, it felt like we could conquer anything together. Every morning, he'd make me breakfast, his hands steady as he stirred the porridge or popped slices of toast under the grill. He'd hum to himself, and I'd catch him smiling at me over the top of his cup of coffee. A look of pure affection in his gaze. He never failed to remind me how much he loved me, how amazing I was, how strong I was. "I love you, you know that?" he'd say, his voice low and husky, as he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into the warmth of his chest. I'd nestle there, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat as I wadded my way around the flat. "I love you too," I'd answer, my voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." The simple words seemed to carry a weight, one I couldn't quite explain, but that felt important, like a secret that belonged only to us. And in those moments, when the world outside seemed too busy and too fast, when I felt like I was the only one who could carry the weight of our baby and this new life, his love made everything feel possible. But despite my joy, something stirred in the back of my mind, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't doubt, not exactly. It was a nagging feeling, like the scent of something burning, faint but there, lingering at the edge of my thoughts. It wasn't like me to second-guess Edward or our life together. We'd been inseparable for years, had built a life based on mutual love and respect. But as my belly grew and my hormones shifted in ways I couldn't control, I found myself questioning everything. The last few weeks had been a blur of doctor's appointments, baby books, and those faint traces of discomfort that I tried to ignore, cramping, back pain, and the general sense of being out of control. It felt like my body was no longer my own, but I didn't let it show. We'd had our first scan a week earlier, and Edward had been beside me the entire time, squeezing my hand as we watched the little flicker on the screen, the heartbeat pulsing like a tiny, fragile promise. The excitement in his eyes had been enough to make me tear up, but that nagging feeling persisted. Would everything change once the baby arrived? It was the only thought I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. Later that evening, after the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink and the house was bathed in the soft glow of our bedside lamp, I lay in bed, the weight of the day pressing down on my body. Edward was asleep beside me, his arm draped lazily across my waist, his breath steady and calm. But my mind wouldn't quiet. It was full of questions, of half-formed worries. Would we be able to make time for each other once the baby arrived? Would the dynamic of our relationship shift in ways we couldn't predict? I reached over and turned off the bedside light, pulling the covers closer as I closed my eyes. The quiet hum of the night outside seemed to hold the answer, but I couldn't quite grasp it. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I felt a subtle shift in the air, a change in the rhythm of the house. My heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't quite place why. I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was on the edge of breaking. Suddenly, Edward stirred beside me. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep but laced with concern. I turned toward him, my heart suddenly racing. I could feel the heaviness of my own thoughts pressing down on me, but I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I murmured, running my fingers along his arm. "Just tired." He kissed my forehead gently, his warmth melting into mine. "Love you," he whispered again, and I closed my eyes, clinging to that moment, hoping it would carry me through the rest of the night. But as I lay there, my thoughts swirling in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for us just beyond the horizon, something that would change everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The first few days after Emily was born were a blur, a whirlwind of hospital visits, breast pumps, sleepless nights, and my body. Well, my body was no longer mine. It was like I'd borrowed someone else's skin, stretched and heavy, swollen in places I'd never known could swell. I could barely look at myself in the mirror without feeling a pang of unfamiliarity. It wasn't just the marks on my belly, the stretch marks that had been left like scars of battle from carrying her. It was the way I felt, exhausted, fragile, broken in places I hadn't even known existed. I had given everything and more for this tiny, perfect creature. And while Emily was nothing short of a miracle, I couldn't help but feel lost. Every inch of me felt depleted, physically, mentally, emotionally. I'd never known a kind of tiredness like this. It wasn't the kind that could be fixed with sleep. It was a bone-deep weariness, the kind that made you question if you would ever feel like yourself again. Edward was there, of course. He'd never been anything but supportive, especially in those first days when I could barely stay awake long enough to make a cup of tea. He'd bring me tea in the mornings, whispering soft words of comfort as he pressed the warm mug into my hands. But there was something different about him too, something I couldn't quite place. I could see it in the way his gaze lingered on me, on my figure, longer than it should have. The way his eyes would dart to my stomach, still soft, still round with the remnants of pregnancy. His gaze would always slip away quickly, like he was ashamed of himself for looking. But I saw it. I saw the way his brow furrowed as he stood there, arms crossed, observing me. It made me want to curl up into myself, to hide away. The house, once filled with the excitement of preparing for Emily's arrival, now seemed quiet and heavy. Every room felt too big. My mind felt foggy, like I was underwater, struggling to keep up with everything: diapers, feeding schedules, endless feeds, and the constant whir of the breast pump. I spent the first few weeks just surviving, moving from one moment to the next, unsure of how I was even getting through the days. But it wasn't just the exhaustion that bothered me. It was the distance between Edward and me. We barely spoke, except for the necessary exchanges about the baby or the occasional reminder to eat something. He'd sit beside me, holding Emily in his arms, but his eyes were distant, as if he wasn't really there. When we did talk, it was like he was a stranger, someone I'd known a long time ago but had somehow lost touch with. It wasn't like before. It wasn't like when we were lying together on the couch, making plans for our future, talking about the baby with excitement, with wonder. Now there was just silence between us, an uncomfortable silence. Before you continue listening, if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to show me your support by subscribing. Your subscription means a lot. It helps keep these stories alive. And without you, there's no way I can continue sharing the twists, the turns, and the raw moments that speak to the heart. Please don't leave me hanging. Subscribe now, thank you. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, feeding Emily. She was nestled in my arms, her tiny hands clutching at my shirt as she latched onto me. I watched her, mesmerized by the way she fed, her little face scrunching up in concentration. It was one of those rare moments when I felt connected to her, to the joy of motherhood. Edward came in, his footsteps heavier than usual, his face shadowed with something I couldn't place. He put his mug down on the counter, staring at me for a moment. I didn't even look up. I couldn't bear to. But I knew he was watching me. I could feel his gaze on me, as if I was being scrutinized, measured. "Still not lost all the weight, then?" he asked, his voice calm, but the words piercing through the quiet of the room like a knife. I looked up, startled. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did he really just say that? My stomach twisted in an instant, and I felt a hot flush of anger spread through me. "Not yet," I said, my voice tight, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's only been a few weeks." I forced a smile, but it felt like the most fragile thing in the world. "Yeah, but you've got to start thinking about it, don't you? You're not getting any younger." His words were soft, but the edge was there, sharp and clear as day. It was like a slap to my face. I blinked, feeling the room go strangely quiet. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I might burst into tears, but I didn't. I stayed still, as if I didn't move, it wouldn't be real. I wanted to tell him to shut up, to scream at him, remind him how he wasn't the one who'd just pushed a human being out of his body. He wasn't the one whose body had been stretched beyond recognition, whose hips now ached in ways I couldn't even explain. I wanted to tell him that he had no idea how I felt, no idea what I was going through. But I didn't. I just nodded and forced a smile, the kind that never quite reached my eyes. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, trying to make my voice sound nonchalant, even though my insides felt like they were being torn apart. I turned my attention back to Emily, focusing on her small hands as they wrapped around my finger. I wanted to disappear into her, into this tiny little creature who relied on me for everything, who didn't care about what I looked like, who didn't care about my weight or my stretch marks or my tired eyes. But the truth was, I had heard every word, every single word, and it stung in a way that I hadn't expected. Edward didn't say anything else. He turned away and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I stayed there, frozen, still holding Emily to me, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fix what had just broken inside me. The distance between Edward and me felt wider than ever. It wasn't just the physical distance, the space between us had always been there. It was the emotional distance, the gulf that seemed to grow with every passing day, and I felt that it was only going to get worse. That night, as I lay beside Edward, the weight of his words pressing on me, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing, replaying his voice over and over. I reached over to him, but he was already asleep, his back to me. I wanted to reach out, to tell him how much he'd hurt me, but something held me back. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the thoughts, but I couldn't. The room felt colder now. His silence felt colder. I couldn't shake the words from my mind, the ones he'd said and the ones he hadn't. It was like they were etched in the air around me, hovering just out of reach. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the weight of them. They followed me around, whispered in the corners of my mind like a shadow that refused to leave. Before you continue listening, if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to show me your support by subscribing. Your subscription means a lot. It helps keep these stories alive, and without you, there's no way I can continue sharing the twists, the turns, and the raw moments that speak to the heart. Please don't leave me hanging. Subscribe now, thank you. Edward's eyes would linger on me, on my hips, on my stomach, the soft curve I hadn't been able to shift, despite the long walks, the sleepless nights, the endless pumping. His gaze was disapproving, like I was something to be fixed, something that had gone wrong. He'd mask it with a forced smile, but it never quite reached his eyes. I could see it. I could always see it, the disappointment, even when he tried to pretend otherwise. In the mornings, he'd kiss me goodbye, but it didn't feel the same anymore. His lips weren't as warm as they used to be, and his embrace felt more like a formality than affection. I would stand in the kitchen, holding Emily, watching him gather his things to leave for work, and I'd want to ask him why. Why had things changed? But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I'd turn away from him, my hand tightening around the mug in my hands as I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest, the gnawing emptiness that had started to settle there. I would tell myself it was just exhaustion, that I was overthinking things, that I was too sensitive. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had shifted between us. At night, when I lay in bed with Emily asleep beside me, I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake, staring up at the ceiling, my hand pressed against my stomach, feeling the weight of it all. The pressure of wanting to be perfect. The pressure of being a good wife, a good mother, and now, apparently, a good body too. The weight of those expectations crushed me, suffocated me. I wasn't sure when I had agreed to become something more than just me. When had I become my weight, my appearance, my stretch marks? I didn't know how it had happened, but I could feel it in the way Edward looked at me, in the way his words seemed to carry an unspoken message. You need to do better. But better at what? I had been so consumed with the idea of motherhood, with becoming the mother I thought I was supposed to be, that I'd lost sight of everything else, of myself, of my own needs. And the worst part was, I didn't even know how to ask for help. One morning, after another restless night, I found myself in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the reflection that greeted me with eyes too tired and a face too pale. My stomach, still round from the baby, though the softness now lingered, mocking me, was a painful reminder of how much I had yet to get back to normal. I'd been avoiding the scale for weeks, knowing that the numbers would make me feel worse than I already did. But today, something inside me snapped. I was tired of feeling out of control, tired of feeling like my body wasn't mine. With shaking hands, I stepped onto the scale, holding my breath as the numbers flickered and then settled. My stomach dropped. This isn't me, I thought, staring at the reflection in the mirror. It wasn't the number that shocked me. It was the weight of the shame that rushed through me, like a tide that I couldn't stop. How had I let it get this bad? The door creaked open behind me. I froze. Edward was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. His gaze fell on the scale, and then to me, his eyes flickering to my stomach before snapping back to my face. "You're still not where you should be," he said, his voice flat, matter of fact, cold. I blinked, feeling my heart drop to my feet. I didn't even know how to respond. The words felt like a punch in the gut, and I could feel the tears welling up before I could stop them. I'd always prided myself on being strong, on being able to hold things together, but in that moment, I couldn't. "I'm sorry I'm not perfect," I whispered, my voice breaking. The words escaped before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted it. Edward sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He stepped closer, his expression softening, but his words didn't help. "I didn't mean it like that, love. I'm just concerned. You've got to think about your health." I nodded, though I didn't know if I was nodding at him or at the image in the mirror. But something in me broke then. I wanted to scream, to shout at him that I was thinking about my health, that every time I ate, every time I worked out, every time I put my baby to sleep in the middle of the night, I was thinking about my health, my well-being. I wanted to tell him how hard it was, how hard I was trying to be everything, but I didn't. I just stood there, my eyes downcast, feeling the weight of his words press on me, suffocating me. I just, I began, but the words faltered on my lips. I couldn't even finish the sentence. How could I explain the way his words made me feel? How could I explain that I wasn't just trying to lose weight, I was trying to survive? I just don't know what you want from me, I finally managed to say, my voice low, tinged with frustration. I looked up at him then, my eyes pleading for understanding. I feel like I've lost myself. I'm trying to be a good mother, a good wife. But when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize myself anymore. Edward's face softened, but only slightly. He took a step towards me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Was it guilt? Was it real concern? Or was it something else? I never meant to make you feel this way, he said quietly, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. I just want you to be healthy. You're everything to me, you know that, right? But I wasn't sure if it was really about my health anymore. Was it? Was it truly about wanting me to feel better? Or was it just about wanting me to look the way I used to look? I couldn't tell anymore. The silence hung between us, thick and heavy. And for the first time, I realized something. The more I tried to fix myself, the more I felt like I was losing myself. Before I could respond, before I could gather my thoughts, Edward stepped away, his hand dropping to his side. I'll be in the living room. Let me know if you need anything, he said, his voice distant again, his face closed off. I stood there in the bathroom staring at my reflection. I wasn't sure what to do with all the emotions swirling inside me. Anger, hurt, confusion. But more than anything, I felt like I was losing the person I had once been, and I didn't know how to get her back. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Again. The weight of Edward's words pressing on me, I stared at the ceiling. Emily was fast asleep in her crib, the soft sound of her breathing the only thing that grounded me. But even her presence couldn't calm the storm inside me. What had happened to us? I closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep, but I still couldn't. Not with the thoughts running through my mind, the quiet voice that whispered again and again, "Is this who you want to be?" Before you continue reading, if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to show me your support by subscribing. Your subscription means a lot. It helps keep these stories alive, and without you, there's no way I can continue sharing the twists, the turns, and the raw moments that speak to the heart. Please don't leave me hanging. Subscribe now. Thank you. It was a rainy Friday evening when it all came to a head. The sky had been dark for hours, thick clouds hanging low like a storm was waiting to burst. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside the house was still. Too still. I had just finished putting Emily to bed, settling her into the soft, quilted cot we'd bought for her. She looked so small, so fragile, nestled among her blankets. I lingered by her side for a moment longer than I should have, watching her chest rise and fall with each tiny breath. I found myself tracing her little fingers as they curled into a fist, the gentleness of the moment almost enough to make me forget the world outside. But then, the door opened. I heard Edward's shoes clicking against the hardwood floor before I even saw him, the soft jingle of his car keys as he tossed them into the bowl by the door. He walked into the kitchen, his tie loosened, his face tired, his eyes dull in a way they hadn't been before. He had been working late again, and I could tell it wasn't just the hours that were wearing him down. There was something more, something darker in the way he moved, as if he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. "Evening," I said, trying to keep the tone light as I wiped my hands on a dish towel, pretending the tension between us wasn't suffocating. He didn't respond with his usual smile or even a simple "hi." Instead, he glanced at me quickly, then turned his attention to the sink, where he began washing his hands. "You still haven't managed to get back to the gym, have you?" he said before I could even say hello. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, like a slap. You're letting yourself go. My heart sank in an instant, dropping like a stone in my chest. The words hit harder than ever before. This wasn't concern anymore. It wasn't even a joke. It was a statement, a judgment. The sting of his words sent a rush of heat to my face, and I felt the tears welling up, threatening to spill over. But I held them back. I wasn't going to cry in front of him again, not this time. I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Edward, enough," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I've just had a baby. Do you even realize what you're saying?" His back was still turned to me, but I could feel him tense at the edge of my words. He let the silence hang for a moment before he turned to face me. His expression softened, but not enough to make me feel better. There was something about his eyes, something distant, like he didn't even understand why I was upset. "I know, but you can't let yourself fall behind. It's just not healthy," he said, his tone even, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I couldn't breathe. I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up inside me like a volcano. "You think I don't know that?" My voice cracked as I spoke, but I didn't care. "You think I'm not trying?" I took a deep breath, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "But I'm not just a body, Edward. I'm me. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. And I need more than just your criticism. I need your support." I could feel the space between us growing. It wasn't just physical, it was something more. I stood there, my chest heaving, staring at him like he was a stranger, like someone I didn't recognize anymore. How had we gotten here? How had it become so easy for him to speak to me this way? Edward didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his hands resting on the edge of the sink, his face unreadable. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the rain against the windows, the soft hum of the fridge, but nothing else. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." But the damage was done. I wasn't sure if his apology meant anything anymore. The words felt hollow, empty, like he was saying them because it was expected, not because he understood. Could he even understand? Could he understand how his words had felt like a betrayal, like a constant reminder that I wasn't enough? I wanted to tell him everything that was in my heart. I wanted to scream at him, to make him see the pain he had caused. I wanted to ask him why it felt like he didn't care anymore, why he couldn't see that I was trying. But instead, I stood there, the silence swallowing me whole. "You didn't mean to hurt me," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "But you did, Edward. You've hurt me again and again, and I don't know how to fix this anymore." He took a step forward, reaching out, his hand hovering near my shoulder. But I pulled away before he could touch me. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. I couldn't pretend that his apologies made everything go back to the way it was. "You're not the man I married," I whispered, barely hearing my own words. "You've changed, and I don't know who you are anymore." Edward froze, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. The air between us thickened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly wondered if we could ever get back to where we had been. I turned away from him, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. The tears I had held back all evening finally began to fall, not in great sobs, but in silent streams that betrayed the pain I had kept hidden for so long. I wiped them away angrily, my hands trembling, but there was no stopping them. "Please, Edward," I said, my voice breaking. "I need you. But I need the man I fell in love with, not this stranger who doesn't see me." There was a long pause, but it was Edward's voice that finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice raw. "I don't know what's happening to us. I don't know how we ended up here." But the damage was done. I had heard his apology too many times. I had seen his indifference too many times. I couldn't take it anymore. The words I had been holding back for months, no, for years, finally broke free. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I whispered, my chest tight with fear. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Edward's face paled. The room seemed to close in around us as his eyes widened, as if the very idea of losing me had never occurred to him. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice trembling. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I meant anymore, but one thing was certain. I couldn't keep living in this place of constant hurt, this place of silent tension. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed space, I needed time, and I needed to figure out who I was, apart from the roles Edward had placed on me, wife, mother, body. But as I reached for the door, I heard his voice again, low and pleading. "Don't go," Edward whispered. "Please, I don't want to lose you." I paused, my hand still on the doorknob, but my heart was torn. Could we fix this? Could we find our way back from here? Or had we already passed the point of no return? I didn't know. All I knew was that for the first time in a long while, I was finally asking myself the question that had been hanging in the air between us for too long. Was it too late? In the weeks that followed, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden change, nor was it something I had planned. It was more like a quiet revolution, something that began deep within, when I least expected it. I wasn't going to let Edward or anyone define who I was based on the size of my waist or the weight of my body. I had carried a child for 9 months. I had brought her into this world, held her in my arms, and protected her. That counted for something. I counted for something. The first few days after that fight were unbearable. The silence between Edward and me was thick, suffocating. We spoke only when necessary, our conversations short and clipped, like we were strangers passing in the night. He still tried to act like everything was fine, like the words he had thrown at me weren't still echoing in my mind, but I could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for me to make the first move, to apologize, to come back to him, to be the woman I had been before. But I wasn't that woman anymore. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be. The realization hit me one morning as I stood in front of the mirror, staring at myself. I hadn't stepped on the scale in weeks. I didn't need to. My body was mine now, and it wasn't going to be something I measured against an arbitrary number. It was a vessel that had carried life. It had transformed, had been stretched, had been torn apart and rebuilt. And every scar, every mark, every curve was a reminder of the strength I had within me. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel beautiful. I just needed to believe it for myself. It was a rainy Wednesday morning when I made my decision. The house was quieter than usual. Edward had left for work early, his absence like a weight I didn't know how to shake off. I had spent the morning tidying up, moving through the house on autopilot. Emily had been fussy and I was exhausted, but there was something more pressing on my mind than the usual daily grind, something stirring within me that I couldn't ignore any longer. I slipped into my sneakers, threw on my favorite hoodie, and pulled the pram out of the hallway. Emily was asleep, her little face soft and peaceful, so I wrapped her in her pink blanket and headed out the door. The fresh air hit me immediately, sharp and cool against my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a little spark of something inside me, a reminder that I was more than just a mother, more than just a wife. I walked for hours that day. The streets of London were wet, the pavement slick with rain, but I didn't care. I wasn't walking for anyone else but me. I let my mind drift as I pushed the pram along, letting the rhythm of my steps clear the fog in my brain. The quiet hum of the city in the distance, the rush of water from the gutters, the sound of my own breathing. Everything felt a little more grounded, a little more real. When I returned, I felt lighter. Something had shifted inside me, like I had just let go of years of baggage I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I was still me. I was still a mother, still a wife, But I was also something else, something just for me. Before you continue reading, if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to show me your support by subscribing. Your subscription means a lot. It helps keep these stories alive, and without you, there's no way I can continue sharing the twists, the turns, and the raw moments that speak to the heart. Please don't leave me hanging. Subscribe now, thank you. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I found myself in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was strangely satisfying, grounding me in the moment. Edward had come home late, as usual. He entered the kitchen without saying much, just a quick kiss on the cheek as he passed me. But it wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't looking for his approval. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but there was an edge to my voice that I couldn't hide. "Busy," he replied, as if it was the only word he could say. His eyes flickered to my face, then quickly away. I could feel him watching me as I worked, like he was waiting for me to break, waiting for me to ask for his reassurance. But I didn't. I focused on the chopping board, my hands moving with purpose. When I spoke again, my voice was steady, firm. "I went for a walk today with Emily." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Oh, how long did you go for?" "Hours," I said, not looking up. "It was good. I needed it." There was a moment of silence between us, and then Edward spoke again, his voice almost tentative. "It's good you're taking care of yourself." I looked up at him then, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. There was a hint of something in his gaze, a flicker of uncertainty, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or concern. "Yes," I said, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. "It is good." I didn't need him to say it. I didn't need him to tell me I was doing the right thing. I was doing it for me. The next few days passed in a blur of self-care. I ate meals that nourished me, not just to lose weight, but to feel strong. I took the time to enjoy the little moments, like a hot cup of tea in the morning or the feel of the sun on my face as I took Emily out for walks. I wasn't doing it for anyone's approval, not Edward's, not anyone else's. It was for me. I even started doing things for myself that I hadn't done since before the pregnancy, things I had long forgotten. I read books again, started writing in my journal, and slowly but surely I began to carve out time for me. The more I took care of myself, the more I realized I didn't need Edward's approval. His opinions didn't define who I was, nor did his expectations. I was learning to live for myself, not through the lens of what he or anyone else thought of me. And the more I reclaimed that sense of self, the more I saw how much I had been losing in the process of trying to please him. And then, just as I was beginning to feel like I was getting a handle on things, Edward came home early one evening. It wasn't unusual, but the way he entered the house was. There was something different in the way he moved, like he was unsure of himself, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," he said, standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. His gaze was softer than it had been, but there was an unease about him that I couldn't ignore. "Can we talk?" I glanced at him, the tension in my chest rising again. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I had learned something over the past few weeks. I had learned to stand up for myself. "Of course," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was beating faster now. "What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I've been treating you, and I'm sorry, I don't want to lose you. I've been an idiot, and I didn't see it until now." The words were surprising, but I didn't let them catch me off guard. I was done letting his apologies hold all the power. "I appreciate your apology, Edward," I said, my voice calm, even though my insides were still a mess. "But I need more than that. I need to know you're willing to support me, not just expect things from me. I can't do this on my own, but I also can't be with someone who doesn't see me for who I am." The silence between us stretched out, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to fill it. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of my own words, I realized something else. No matter what happened between us, I had finally found something I had been missing for so long: myself. Edward looked at me, his face a mixture of hope and regret. "I want to be that person for you, Anna." "I do." But in that moment, I wasn't sure if his words would ever be enough. The question that lingered between us wasn't just about what we wanted, it was about who we were, separately and together. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to find the answer just yet. But there was one thing I knew for certain: I was no longer waiting for anyone to give me permission to live. One evening when Edward came home early, something he hadn't done in weeks. The house was quiet. The only sound the soft hum of the television, the low murmur of a documentary that Emily wasn't interested in, but I found oddly comforting. She was playing on the floor at my feet, her chubby fingers reaching for a colourful toy she kept knocking out of her grasp. I was watching her, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence between Edward and me, the space that had grown so large over the last few months. I hadn't expected him to come home early. The house had become something of a refuge for me, a place I could escape from the tension in our marriage. I had spent so much time just focusing on Emily, on getting myself back to a place where I felt like me again, that I had stopped worrying about what Edward was doing. But now, as I heard the front door close softly behind him, I felt my heart start to pound in my chest. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His suit was slightly crumpled, as if he had been rushing, but it wasn't just his appearance that caught my attention. It was the way he was standing, like he was bracing himself for something. "Can we talk?" Edward asked, his voice quiet, almost tentative. I nodded, though my heart was thudding in my chest. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He walked towards me, hesitated for a moment, and then sat down beside me on the sofa. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, things we hadn't said to each other in far too long. Emily looked up at him, offering a shy smile before turning her attention back to her toy, unaware of the tension in the room. Edward looked at me, his blue eyes tired, but not in the way I'd seen them before. This was different. There was something in his gaze that told me he wasn't here to deflect or make excuses. He was here to face what he had done. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and slow, like the words were heavy on his tongue. "About everything, about us, about you." He paused, as if the weight of the admission was too much to carry in one go. "I've been a complete arse. I never meant to make you feel small or less than. You've done everything for me and for Emily, and I've been selfish." His words hung in the air, and I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The anger, the hurt, it had all been building for so long. And now, with him sitting here beside me, trying to explain himself, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Could I really forgive him? Could we move forward from this? I looked at him for a long moment, watching the way his hand fidgeted with the fabric of his trousers, his face scrunched up in a way that was so unlike the confident man I had once known. For a moment, it felt like we were back in time, before the fights, before the distance. But then reality hit, and I knew that the man sitting next to me wasn't the same man who had once made me feel like the center of his world. He had changed. I had changed. "It's not just about what you said, Edward," I replied, my voice calm but firm, though it wavered slightly as the words left my mouth. "It's about how you made me feel, like I wasn't good enough unless I fit a certain image." I could see the guilt wash over his face. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had come to recognize as his sign of frustration. He looked down at the floor for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "I get it now. I do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been an idiot. I've been blind to everything you've been going through, to what you've done. I've been so focused on everything that's been wrong that I didn't see what was right in front of me." He glanced over at Emily, who was now grabbing at the remote control, as if to assert her little presence in the conversation. The silence that followed felt different. It wasn't awkward, not in the same way it had been in the past. It was a quieter, more introspective silence. Edward wasn't just speaking to fill the space. He was reflecting on his words, on his actions, and the impact they had on me. I wasn't sure how to respond. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he truly understood, that this apology wasn't just another empty gesture. But I'd heard the words before. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I'll do better." They had become hollow promises, something I could no longer take at face value. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, something raw, something genuine, and it left me wondering whether I had been too quick to close myself off from him. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything pressing on my chest. "Edward," I said, my voice wavering slightly despite my efforts to stay composed, "I don't know what you expect from me. I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened, everything you've said." "I don't expect you to forget," he said quickly, his tone urgent. "I just want a chance. A real chance to show you that I can be better, that I can be the man you deserve." I looked at him, feeling the pull of his words, but also the weight of my own pain. Could I trust him again? Could I trust us again? "You've hurt me, Edward," I said softly, my gaze dropping to my hands in my lap. "And I can't just pretend like that didn't happen. It's not that easy." He reached out then, his hand brushing mine, but I didn't pull away. I let him touch me, let the warmth of his skin remind me of who we had been before everything had fallen apart. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild, that we could move past the hurt and find our way back to each other. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step. Not yet. "I know," he said quietly, squeezing my hand gently. "And I don't expect you to. But I'm asking for the chance to make things right, not for me, Anna, for us, for Emily, and for you." His words hung in the air like a promise. A fragile one, yes, but a promise nonetheless. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind swirling with 1,000 different thoughts. I wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't make decisions based on fear anymore. I couldn't keep holding on to the past, no matter how painful it had been. I needed to figure out what I truly wanted, what I truly needed. And just as I opened my mouth to say something, anything, Edward's phone buzzed loudly from the coffee table, cutting through the tension in the room. He glanced at it, his face changing in an instant. The urgency in his expression made my stomach twist. "Sorry," he said, reaching for his phone. I need to take this." He glanced at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Give me a moment." I nodded, though something in my chest tightened. There was a sense of unease creeping up again, as if this moment of clarity was about to shatter. Edward stepped away, phone to his ear, muttering something about a work emergency. But as I watched him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming next, whatever this phone call meant, was about to change everything again. And for the first time in months, I wondered if I was truly ready to face what was coming. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate my future. I just didn't know yet if that included Edward. If you're feeling lost or unseen right now, remember this: you are enough. Your worth isn't defined by how others see you or the expectations placed on you. You've carried life, you've loved, and you've given more than anyone could understand. Healing takes time, and it's okay to put yourself first. You deserve kindness, respect, and the space to just be you. You've got this. Don't give up on yourself. If this story touched you, don't miss out on the next story. Please subscribe now to keep following more stories and turn on the notification bell to get exclusive updates straight to your inbox. Your support helps me keep creating these stories that speak to the heart.